I refused to visit my dad after my room was converted to an office bedroom. My parents got divorced when I was 15, and it was messy as hell. Mom moved out and Dad kept the house. At first, everything seemed normal. My room stayed exactly how I left it. Band posters on the walls, my gaming setup in the corner. Clothes scattered everywhere like a tornado hit it. Dad was actually trying to be the cool parent at first. He'd order pizza for dinner 3 nights in a row and let me stay up as late as I wanted. I thought maybe the divorce wouldn't be so bad after all. Then about 6 months later, Dad started dating this woman named Crystal. Yeah, I know. The name should have been a red flag. She was one of those people who smile too much and try way too hard to be your friend. Every time she came over, she'd be like, "Hey kiddo, how's school?" In this fake, cheerful voice that made my skin crawl. Crystal had this annoying habit of rearranging stuff in our house. She'd move the coffee maker to a different counter and claim it'd better fun you or whatever. She switched out Dad's beer for some organic kombucha crap that tasted like dirt. But I figured it was just typical new girlfriend behavior. The real problem started when Crystal moved in permanently. Dad didn't even ask me how I felt about it. One day, I came home from school and half her junk was already in the living room. Boxes of scented candles, throw pillows with inspirational quotes, and this weird crystal collection that she claimed had healing powers. But here's where it gets really messed up. Crystal worked from home doing some kind of online consulting thing. She kept complaining that she needed a proper office space with good lighting and privacy for her Zoom calls. Our house only had 3 bedrooms, Dad's room, my room, and this tiny guest room that was basically a closet with a window. I was at Mom's house for the weekend when it happened. When I came back Sunday night, I walked upstairs to my room and almost had a heart attack. My door was wide open, and everything was completely different. My bed was gone. My gaming setup was gone. My posters were rolled up in the corner like trash. Instead, there was this ugly white desk, a filing cabinet, and one of those exercise balls that people use as chairs. The walls were painted this gross beige color that looked like baby vomit. But here's the kicker. In the corner, where my bed used to be, there was now a pull-out couch. Not even a decent one. It was one of those cheap ones from a furniture warehouse. That feels like sleeping on a pile of rocks. I stood there for like 5 minutes just staring. Then I heard Crystal's voice behind me, surprise. "We turned your room into a multi-purpose space. You can still sleep here when you visit, but now I have somewhere proper to work when you visit." Like I was some kind of house guest in my own home. I lost it. I started yelling about how this was my room. How they had no right to touch my stuff without asking. Crystal just stood there with this fake sympathetic look and said, "Honey, you're only here half the time now anyway. It makes sense to use the space more efficiently." Dad appeared and tried to calm me down, but I could tell he was on her side. He kept saying things like, "It's just temporary and your stuff is safe in the garage, and you'll get used to it." But I knew it wasn't temporary. This was Crystal marking her territory. The worst part was discovering what happened to my things. My gaming console was in Dad's room now, which meant I had to ask permission to use my own stuff. My clothes were stuffed into plastic bins in the closet. My desk lamp, the one I'd had since I was 10, was apparently donated because it didn't match the new office aesthetic. I tried sleeping on that pull-out couch exactly once. The springs dug into my back all night, and every time I moved, the whole thing creaked loud enough to wake up the neighbors. Plus, Crystal had set up her essential oil diffuser right next to where my pillow was. So, I spent the whole night breathing in some weird lavender eucalyptus combo that gave me a headache. The next morning, I packed my stuff and went back to Mom's. I told Dad I wasn't coming back until I had a real room again. He said I was being dramatic and that plenty of families have multi-purpose spaces. But I wasn't talking about multi-purpose. I was talking about my childhood bedroom being erased like I never existed. Crystal even had the nerve to send me texts saying she understood why I was upset, and that we should work together to find a solution. Her solution was putting up a curtain divider so I could have privacy while she worked. A curtain in what used to be my own room. It's been 8 months now, and I still refuse to stay there overnight. 8 months later, the situation hadn't improved. Every time I drove past my dad's street, I felt this mix of anger and sadness I couldn't quite shake. I'd call him occasionally, but most conversations ended with him sighing and telling me I needed to lighten up and see things from Crystal's perspective. His perspective was apparently that my room was her new office, my stuff was in bins, and I was lucky to even be allowed to visit. The thought that my childhood, my memories, and my sense of home had been bulldozed didn't seem to occur to him at all. I tried explaining that it wasn't about the space, it was about respect. About feeling valued in a home that was supposed to be mine too. At least emotionally, if not physically. But Dad would nod, mumble, "I get it," and then immediately start talking about taxes or work problems. Crystal had clearly poisoned the idea of me in his mind. Every interaction was now tinged with her framing. I wasn't just upset. I was difficult, overreacting, and worst of all, dramatic. One weekend, I decided to confront it in person, not to stay overnight, but to try and negotiate. Maybe if I laid everything out logically, they'd understand. I walked in, and immediately my stomach sank. The office bedroom nightmare had only gotten worse. Crystal had installed a new shelf, now holding stacks of her work essentials and more decorative tchotchkes that weren't hers to begin with. My old beanbag chair had been replaced with a meditation stool. The posters my childhood and teenage treasures were gone, rolled up, donated, or recycled, Dad claimed. My books, some signed by authors I loved, were now in a box labeled miscellaneous, keep or toss. I tried to reason with Dad calmly at first. It's not about the furniture, it's about my room, my history, my home. He shrugged, muttered something about efficiency in modern living, and went back to scrolling on his phone. Crystal, standing beside him, smiled too wide, the kind of smile that made me grit my teeth. I just want everyone to be comfortable, she said. Comfortable. She was comfortable. I wasn't, and she knew it. The turning point came when she decided to give me a tour of the new room setup. Like I hadn't lived there for 15 years. She pointed to the filing cabinet and said, "See? You can use this for your clothes now. We even labeled the drawers for you." Labeled my drawers. My clothes. Like they were items in a warehouse. I snapped. "You didn't ask me about any of this. This isn't your space, this is mine. And you can't just decide it's yours because you need an office." My voice shook more with rage than fear, but Dad didn't even flinch. Crystal rolled her eyes and smirked. "It's just a room, it's not like we erased your memories, my memories erased." That phrase hit me harder than I expected. My childhood, my teenage years, the nights I spent crying after my parents' divorce, gaming marathons with friends in that very room, the countless hours I spent just being me, it was gone. All of it repurposed for someone else's convenience. I left that day more certain than ever that I wasn't coming back until my room was restored. But the passive-aggressive text continued. "We really want you to feel welcome," Crystal wrote. Welcome? I felt nothing of the sort. "Why don't you just accept the changes?" she asked. And I realized she genuinely thought she was entitled to overwrite my life because she was now the woman of the house. Months dragged on. I started documenting everything, photos of what my room used to look like, receipts from items I had bought for my room, even old emails with Dad where he complimented my decor or teased me about my posters. I needed proof, not for a legal battle, but for my own sanity. I wanted to remember what my room had been, to remind myself that I hadn't imagined it, that my home had been stolen in plain sight. Then came the holiday season. Dad invited me over for Christmas, knowing full well I hadn't stayed overnight in months. I went, but kept my distance. Crystal had gone full holiday decorator mode, tinsel and scented candles everywhere. The room that had once been my safe haven was now a shrine to her tastes. At dinner, she cornered me with her concerned voice. "Why are you still so upset? It's been months, can't we just move on? Move on? Move on from the fact that she had redefined my entire childhood space as her personal fantasy land?" I shook my head and stayed silent, leaving my dad looking frustrated. That night, I realized something. This wasn't just about the room anymore. This was about my autonomy, my voice, my right to exist in spaces that had been mine before someone decided they were theirs. I couldn't let them redefine me. I couldn't let them erase my past. So, I started planning. I reached out to old friends who had visited my old room, took more photos, and even cataloged every item she had moved, thrown out, or donated. I made a list of what I wanted back if I ever decided to reclaim my room properly. Months later, I confronted Dad again, not in anger this time, but with resolve. Either my room comes back to me, or I'm done pretending that this is my home. I'm done visiting until I can be comfortable in my own space. He tried the old arguments, efficiency, compromise, Crystal's needs. But I held my ground. I realized that letting this slide would set a precedent for every part of my life. If I allowed my own father and his partner to take this from me, what else would I let them take? The confrontation didn't go well at first. Crystal threw a tantrum, calling me ungrateful and difficult. Dad tried to mediate but ended up arguing with me instead, saying I was being unreasonable. But then I did something I hadn't done before. I stood firm, unshaken. I reminded them of every memory, every night spent in that room, every small joy tied to the space. I even brought out photos of my posters, my desk, and the mess I had lovingly created. For the first time, Dad seemed to pause. The realization hit him, even if reluctantly, that he hadn't just moved furniture, he had moved pieces of me. Crystal huffed and stormed off to her office, formerly my room, muttering about being dramatic. But I didn't care. I had planted the seed that my room, and by extension my childhood and memories, were not hers to erase. It took weeks of negotiations, debates, and silent standoffs, but slowly, my room was partially restored. My bed came back, the gaming setup returned, and the posters were rehung. Albeit with a few missing from donations Crystal had already given away. The walls were repainted my original color, though not perfect tan. I could sleep there again. It wasn't exactly the same as before, but it was mine. Now, visiting Dad isn't about avoiding Crystal or enduring the fake cheer. It's about reclaiming a space that should have always been mine. I've learned boundaries are sacred, even with family. And sometimes you have to fight to protect your history, your memories, and yourself, even if it means standing up to the people who should love you unconditionally. Even after 8 months of conflict, I finally sleep in my own bed again. And the lavender diffuser? Still there. But now it's mine to control. Story 2: I went camping with my wife and her friends. After a short walk with my 10-year-old son, everything was gone. The people, the tents, the food, the cars, no cell service, just a note on the table. This is for the best, trust me. They left us to die in the forest. 10 days later, they regretted it. Chapter 1. The betrayal in the woods. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. My son and I had only gone for a short walk down the trail. 10, maybe 15 minutes. When we returned to camp, everything was gone. The tents, the food, the cars, even the laughter of the people we came with. All that remained was a flimsy folding table. On it sat a single sheet of paper weighed down by a rock. My son picked it up with trembling hands. His voice cracked as he read aloud. This is for the best. Trust me, it was my wife's handwriting. I looked around, the sinking realization clawing at my chest. They hadn't gotten lost. They hadn't gone for help. They had left us. No phone service, no supplies, just a 10-year-old boy and his father. Abandoned deep in the wilderness. My son's wide eyes met mine. Dad, are we going to die out here? I forced a calm I didn't feel, placing a hand on his shoulder. No, son, we're going to survive. And when we get out of here, they're going to regret this. Chapter 2. 10 Days in the Wild. The first night was the hardest. My son curled up beside me under the open sky, shivering, not only from the chill, but from fear. I had no tent, no stove, no food, just my jacket, a half-empty water bottle, and the determination to keep him alive. Day 1 to 3, survival instincts. We built a lean-to from branches and leaves. I showed him how to collect rainwater using my shirt and a hollowed log. When his stomach growled, I taught him how to identify safe berries and set simple snares with strips of shoelaces. At night, when coyotes howled in the distance, I wrapped my arms around him and whispered stories of how his grandfather had taught me the same skills when I was a boy. It steadied him and me. Day 4 to 6, the breaking point. By the 4th day, exhaustion gnawed at us. My son's lips were cracked, his legs weak. He asked again if we were going to die. I looked into his eyes so much like mine, and forced a smile. We're not going to die. We're going to show them who we are. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about proving that the people who abandoned us couldn't break us. On the 6th day, we found a stream. We drank until our stomachs hurt, and I silently thanked the heavens. Day 7 to 10, the return strength returned. I fashioned crude walking sticks, and we followed the stream downhill until on the 10th day, we stumbled onto a dirt road. A park ranger's truck rounded the bend. His eyes went wide when he saw us, ragged and filthy but alive. My God, people have been searching for you for over a week. Your wife said you wandered off and never came back. I exchanged a look with my son, his little jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw anger in his eyes. She lied, he whispered, and I nodded. Because now it wasn't just survival. It was war. Chapter 3. Homecoming. When we stepped out of the ranger's truck into town, people gasped. Cameras snapped. To everyone else, we were a miracle. A father and son who had defied death in the wild. But to me, it was the first step back into a battlefield, the story they told at the police station. Officers explained what my wife and her friends had said. They wandered off and never came back. We looked, but they must have gotten lost. They painted themselves as worried, helpless bystanders. Some even tearfully volunteered to assist in search efforts, when in reality, they had left us to starve. But their story had cracks. Search records showed they hadn't once gone into the forest after day 1. No missing person flyers, no calls to local hospitals, nothing. The chief leaned across the desk. We're already suspicious. People don't just abandon a campsite like that. I said nothing. Just rested a hand on my son's shoulder. This wasn't the time to explode. Revenge required patience. The children's loyalty. That night, my daughter rushed into my arms crying, Dad, I knew she was lying. She told everyone you ran away, but I didn't believe her. My son, bruised from 10 days in the wild, whispered, she left us to die. And I'll never forgive her. In that moment, I realized something. My revenge wasn't just for me. It was for them too. They needed to see justice done. The first move. The next morning, I contacted my lawyer. Together, we gathered every shred of evidence. The note left on the table, testimony from the ranger and police about their lack of search effort, medical reports showing my son's dehydration and malnourishment, bank records showing their girls' trip expenses while we were missing. We didn't go to them. We didn't argue. We built a case so strong it would crush them under its weight. And when the time came, we delivered it in public. The same way they'd abandoned us. Chapter 4. The reckoning begins. The storm broke faster than I expected. Once the police pieced together the truth, the note, the Rosa's testimony, the missing search efforts, they moved in. What my wife and her friends thought was a clever escape plan now looked very different. Attempted murder by abandonment. The police investigation detectives questioned each of them separately. My wife stuck to her story. He wandered off. We tried to find him, but the cracks were wide. Bank statements showed spa visits and restaurant bills dated during the search period. Photos of them on social media laughing over cocktails. While my son and I were fighting dehydration sealed the coffin. The note she left behind was entered into evidence. Her own handwriting betraying her. The police chief told me privately she didn't just make a mistake. She orchestrated this. The court of public opinion news spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed. Father and son abandoned in wilderness. Survived 10 days against odds. Wife and friends face criminal charges after chilling note surfaces. People were furious. Social media turned them into villains overnight. My wife's friends, once smug and self-righteous, were outed by reporters outside their homes. One by one, their employers distanced themselves publicly. The legal counter-strike. My lawyer filed for full custody of my children, citing endangerment and neglect. With the evidence in hand, the judge didn't hesitate. My wife's custody rights were stripped immediately. Financially, I filed civil suits for damages, medical bills, emotional distress, and reputational harm. Their bank accounts froze under court order. The spa days and cocktails were over. Now they were paying lawyers just to keep themselves out of prison. The emotional blow. The hardest moment came in court when my son stood up, his small voice trembling, but firm. She left us to die. I don't want to live with her ever again. Gasps filled the room. My wife broke down in sobs, but no one moved to comfort her. Her friends wouldn't meet her eyes. The same people who had laughed when they drove away from camp now sat silently, realizing they'd destroyed their own lives. Chapter 5. The Final Justice. The courtroom became the place where everything came full circle. The sentencing. My wife and her friends, once smug enough to leave me and my son in the forest to die, now stood trembling in handcuffs. The prosecutor spared no words. This wasn't negligence. This was abandonment, premeditated and deliberate. The note, the bank records, the Rosa's testimony, my son's words, it was airtight. The judge's gavel came down guilty. They each received prison sentences for reckless endangerment and attempted manslaughter. No suspended terms, no leniency. The social collapse. Reporters swarmed outside the courthouse. Once my wife loved flashing cameras, basking in admiration. Now, every flash burned her image deeper into infamy. Her friends were ostracized, employers cut ties, families disowned them, and even distant relatives refused to answer their calls. They weren't just disgraced, they were radioactive. The emotional closure. The real moment of justice came quietly. After the sentencing, my son tugged on my sleeve. His voice was soft but steady. "Dad, we survived together." I pulled him close. Tears burned my eyes, not from pain, but from pride. He had walked through hell with me and come out stronger. The poetic ending. Months later, as I spoke at a wilderness survival fundraiser, telling our story not as tragedy, but as triumph, I noticed faces in the crowd nodding, clapping, admiring, and I realized the same people who once tried to erase me had given me the greatest gift. A legacy built not on their approval, but on resilience, strength, and truth. They thought they'd left us to die. Instead, they buried themselves, and my son and I walked out of the woods, stronger, united, and free. Epilogue. Years later. Her life behind bars. My wife never adapted to prison life. Once adored at brunches and parties, she became just another inmate number. Her friends, the ones who plotted with her, quickly turned on each other, each trying to cut a better plea deal. Betrayal ate them alive from the inside, just as they once tried to eat me and my son alive by leaving us behind. When I saw her name in a local paper years later, inmate denied early release for lack of remorse, I didn't feel anger anymore, just pity. Our life rebuilt. My son grew into a man who carried scars, but also strength. Those 10 days had hardened him, but they had also bonded us in a way nothing could break. He became a leader in his own right, strong, resilient, and loyal. Together, we told our story. First in schools, then in survival programs, and finally at national conferences. We weren't victims anymore. We were proof of endurance, Poetic justice. One evening after finishing a keynote speech at a fundraiser, my son leaned over and whispered with a small smile, "Dad, remember the note. This is for the best. Trust me." I nodded. He chuckled. Turns out she was right. It really was for the best. The audience stood to applaud us, and I realized the full truth. They had left us in the forest to die, but by doing so, they had killed only themselves. And out of that wilderness, my son and I emerged not just alive, but unstoppable. Was this revenge perfectly justified?